All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of the 23-24 school year. New school year, new strategies, how to help your student plan, persist, and achieve academic success. Good morning, my name is Mary Beth Harrison Cunningham. I'm the manager here at the Family Resource Center, and we are very excited to have Ann Dolin back with us to start off our school year. I think, Ann, you probably started our school year off, I think maybe the last 3 years, so we're really excited to have you back. But do want to share a little bit about Ann before she gets started. So Ann has a strong conviction that school doesn't have to place stress on children and parents. Based on her nearly 30 years of experience working with students, she has developed practical strategies that she shares to help kids succeed and make the most of their academic journey. Ann is a former public school teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. The company specializes in helping students build executive function skills and study habits to perform better in school and ultimately in college. She and her team of more than 120 tutors, executive function coaches, college consultants, and parent coaches provide virtual support to families with kindergarten to college students throughout the country. Ann is the past president of CHAD of Northern Virginia, is an advocate for students with ADHD and other learning differences. She is also the author of the award-winning book, Homework Made Simple, Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework, and her latest book, Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. And we have actually all of Ann's books in our library. So I'd like to turn this over to Ann. Ann, welcome, and thanks so much for being here today.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for having me. I always love talking to the parents at the Parent Resource Center. It's just a pleasure. So today we're talking about a brand new topic. It's a new school year and some new strategies, how to help kids plan, persist, and achieve success. You know, Mary Beth and all the parents and guardians out there, at this time of year, everybody is feeling good. You know, we all have these really great optimistic intentions. For kids, even, they say to parents, this year, Mom, it's going to be better. I'm going to wake up and get ready for school on time. I promise you don't have to nag me. Or I'm going to turn in all my assignments on time. So kids are feeling optimistic and parents are often too. Oh, this year, I'm going to remain calm and communicate better. I'll criticize less and focus more on my child's positives. So we all enter the year with fresh energy, but oftentimes it wanes because there's this disconnect between intention, what we want to do, and action, what we actually do. This is very true of kids. And if you are a parent of a child with a learning disability or ADHD, parenting is just a little bit harder. And so sometimes our intentions don't always turn into actions. We see this disconnect all the time. And we also see it in what parents want and what their child is willing to do. You know, every day parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And they often say things like, I want my child to be more organized. I want him to plan ahead instead of doing things at the last minute. But the problem is the child may not be willing to do those exact things. They may be willing to do something else. So when there's a disconnect between what the parent wants and the child is willing to do, it can be ripe for frustration. And we always want to help parents solve that problem. And that's what I'm here today, this morning, to help you along that journey. So we're going to discuss routines. These are so important and something that most every parent can do. We'll talk about how to help kids get things done, to execute on their work. We'll discuss resources around you because I believe you do not have to go at this alone. In Fairfax County, there are lots of resources to support you. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is communication. How can we develop better relationships with our kids so that we're all on the same page? All right, so let's get started with something I call a ready-made routine. This is basically a routine that's on autopilot. Think, you know, wouldn't it be great if life was a little bit more predictable? If things were generally the same, your child comes home from school, you get home from work and you see them doing homework. You don't have to nag them and cajole them. How can we make this routine of getting started as an example easier? Routines are important because there's something called a predictability factor. And when kids know what the routine is, whether it's starting homework or something else, they're less likely to push back because they know, okay, this is kind of what I do every day. And when kids have predictability, they're more likely to get in line. And predictability isn't just, a daily thing. We'll also talk about setting up predictability 1 week at a time. So when we think about a routine and that predictability factor to get kids on autopilot, the first thing I think of is, all right, when are we going to get started on homework? That would be so much easier than having to nag, cajole, poke, prod, all of those things to get our kids started. So there's actually lots of times kids can do their homework. They can do their homework right after school, after a 30-minute break, before dinner, after dinner, before bed, which is never really a good time. It's too late. And then for our chronic procrastinators, sometimes they'll do it in the morning before they get to school. One student said, oh, I just do it on the bus ride to school, or I do it in my study hall period right before the class. Those aren't really great times. We want our kids to backtrack and start earlier. So what I found with kids with ADHD is that having a little bit of a downtime, whether they get home from school and you're not there and they have a break and then start their work, or you pick them up at aftercare, you come home, they still get that 30-minute break and then they start. So I like the 30-minute break time. That tends to work out well with kids. For older kids, they're going to want to start later. So maybe it's, all right, everybody, let's get started before dinner or even right after dinner, having that routine. I like routines better than schedules. Schedules are really hard to deal with. Like when we say, okay, everybody's going to start homework at 4 o'clock. That probably won't last long because every day is different. Whereas a routine is easier to start and to keep going, to implement. All right, so I mentioned a daily routine, but we can also have these weekly routines. And I personally think these are just as valuable. Let's say you have dinner with your family every Sunday night. And I love having a Sunday night dinner. Usually there's not a lot of stuff going on. You're not racing around to sports practices. You're not working. It's easy on Sunday night to say, let's get together. It can be over, whatever you have in your house. It doesn't have to be a fancy meal. But the idea is you're talking. And during this time, it doesn't have to be about academics, grades, any of those things. Really, dinner time on Sunday night should just be, how are you doing? What's going on? Having great conversations with kids. But what you can do is afterwards, after that dinner, pair that with the Sunday session. And this is when you take 15 minutes so that everybody is looking ahead at their week. You're previewing the week. So you say, let's look at the week ahead. And that is code for what do you have going on. So for younger kids that don't have much homework, they probably have extracurricular activities. They might have to go to soccer practice, or maybe you have joint custody with your significant other. And you're going back and forth, your child's going back and forth between houses. That's hard for kids to keep track of. But if you put those extracurriculars on a weekly schedule in a public place like your refrigerator, it provides that predictability factor. Okay, now I understand what my week is going to look like, thanks to the child. So if this would be helpful to you, I created a free download where this is a weekly schedule you could switch out every week, and every Sunday night you're having that discussion. And depending on the age of your child, you're writing it on the calendar or they are writing it on the calendar. But the idea is it's a routine. And you can get this by going to ectutoring.com/BTS or back to school/2023. And I'll repeat that in a few minutes because that link is for all of our back to school materials for you. Now, that works great for younger kids. Older kids, they may not be willing to do that. So for older kids, you can still have that discussion. What does your week look like? Is there anything different about this week? Oh, right, I have that soccer banquet on Wednesday night, whatever it might be. But what I also find to be helpful, especially for kids with more homework, like middle and high schoolers, is for them to take a moment to go to their homework portal and see what they have going on. So here they can see all their assignments that are populated. Oh, I have a science test on Friday. I have an English quiz on Wednesday. And from there, you can help your child. You can ask the questions, how might you get ready for that? And this is a time where they can do something small now on Sunday night to prepare for the week ahead. I used to do this a lot with my kids when they were younger. And I remember once my youngest son, he's now 21, but he was a sophomore in high school. And I said, okay, let's get ready for the week ahead. And I always modeled it like I would take out my calendar and I would confirm my appointments. I would make my lunch. I would do little things that I kind of did on Sunday night. And he said, Mom, this is so dumb. Why do I have to do this? I already know what my week is like. Like, I don't need to do this anymore. And I said, Ethan, I get it. It's fine. Why don't you just take a look at your portal and see if you have anything going on? And within like 10 seconds, he says, Mom, oh my gosh. Wait, can you go to Amazon right now? Can you order me Catcher in the Rye? I need to have it for Tuesday. I totally forgot that I have to bring that to school on Tuesday. And so the little things like that can happen. Now, another routine we have is one of my favorites. It's an oldie but goodie, and it's a launching pad. A launching pad is another way of kind of getting ready for the next day. So it's a place. It can be a bin, a basket. It can be like even just like a corner of the counter in your kitchen or a corner of the island that's just for your child, where the night before they put all their things they need to take to school the next day. They're launching into a new day in the morning in an organized fashion instead of running around looking for things, which is frustrating for everybody. Now, you can do the same with your digital devices. There should be a charging station for kids to charge their devices overnight. And this would include their laptop, their earbuds, their case or their charger should be there. Whoops. And I think they should almost be like tucked in, just like we all get tucked in for the night. Digital devices can get tucked in too. And again, this is a routine for organization. So the next day, your child is launching into the day in an organized fashion with everything together and charged. And that feels good, because I will say that many kids with ADHD, all kids, but especially those kids, they have a hard time with making sure everything is charged all the time. And it's not uncommon for them to go to school without their devices charged. Now, when we work with kids as executive function coaches, we work on these things. And we also teach something called best friends. And you can talk to your kids about best friends too. So best friends are when things travel together and they go together. Like maybe your child has an assignment notebook where they like to write down their notes or their assignments, and they always have their laptop. Those things should always be together. They're best friends. The laptop and the charger, they should go together because you need them together. They go to school as best friends. The earbuds and the cake. Maybe your child has an iPad and a charger. Their backpack and a lunch could be best friends, or their backpack and a water bottle. And I like this because that terminology feels better. Like, oh, who's that laptop's best friend? Then don't forget your charger again. Sometimes it's all in the delivery. So we talked about daily routines. We talked about weekly routines. We talked about organizing things. Now, let's talk about actually getting things done. First, when things need to get done, they need to start with a place to get them done. Enter the homework hotspot. The homework hotspot is basically a dedicated space for which your child can do homework. They can actually have a couple places that are homework hotspots, but they should be identified. And ideally, they're not on the bed in your child's room. I will tell you that before COVID, I think most kids had a place to do homework. They either had, maybe they sat at the kitchen table, the dining room, they had a place. But during COVID, what I saw happen a lot is they slowly gravitated to to their bedroom. And then it was their bed. And for some kids, it's like a tent. It's under the covers. And we all know that's not conducive to attention. It's way too relaxed. So maybe your child's homework hotspot is in their room. And if it is, and they're 15, it's really hard to say, oh, we're changing this. They're not going to go for it. But what they could have is just a table with a chair in their room. And this could be their homework hotspot. But ideally, their homework hotspot is not near something that's inherently distracting. So the homework hotspot wouldn't be ideal if it's a desk in a room with a TV on. That's too distracting. Ideally, it's not with your phone sitting next to you. And if kids give you a hard time with that, you could just suggest, which is what we do, take your phone and instead of having it flipped over like this, turn it over so the back is facing you. But typically, when we work with kids, we try to encourage them to put their phone, then we want to walk away. For young kids, we as guardians want to be within earshot. I've often seen parents say, oh, my child needs a super quiet place to do homework. They're really, really distracted. And we would think the quieter it is, the better it is. But that is not always the case, especially with kids with ADHD. These kids kind of do like the hum of a busy area. So maybe it's in the dining room. It's kind of a happy median. That's going to be better than maybe on the second floor in a home office without anybody being around. They still need a little bit of accountability. So for a younger student, you might want to be within earshot. But ideally, our game plan is to value completion over quality. It isn't our responsibility as parents to make sure every word is spelled right, or there are enough vocabulary words in every sentence, that every single step in the math equation is done properly. Really, our goal is just to make sure that our kids can get started and generally be finished with their work, not micromanaging over quality. That's where power struggles live, is really around quality. So we want to leave that up to the teacher. Now, inevitably, when our kids are doing homework, they will get stuck. It's guaranteed. And as parents, if they are stuck and they need help, we really have three choices. Here are the three choices. The first one is we can say, listen, Bobby, this is your homework, not mine. I already went to 5th grade. You need to do this on your own. That's not really the best approach. And here's why. As our kids get older, we want them to feel welcomed to come to us. Not just about homework, but about other things like friends, like issues they're experiencing. We want to be that person that's a good listener and can be helpful. So we wouldn't want to turn them away that much. But on the other hand, we wouldn't want to say, oh, Bobby, yeah, I know exactly how to do this. This is how you do it. Let me show you how. Because what your child will probably say is, that's not how my teacher said to do it, which is probably true. But here's the happy medium. And this is the third option. Do you have examples of this in your notes or in your book? Did your teacher show you how to do this? If you logged online for the notes, would that be in there? And I love that approach because it kind of strikes that balance of guiding your child, but allowing them to kind of figure it out a little bit on their own. So when it comes to schoolwork, we are not alone as guardians. There are lots of resources available to us. And it is our job, if we see our child struggling, to reach out to these resources. There are lots and lots of ways kids can get help. At the school, they may have a flex period. And this is a time built into their day where they can go and see any teacher that they want and get help. They may have a peer study group. We see this a lot in older students where they can work with other kids in their class and form a peer study group. Those are always helpful. The Parent Resource Center, which is why we're all here today. I think of all the counties I work with in Virginia, and I speak to school districts outside of Virginia, there is no one that's better than the Fairfax County Parent Resource Center. They are just such a gold mine of help. And if you're super stuck, you call them and they'll point you in the right direction. The teacher after school is another resource. If your child's struggling, that usually teachers have after school hours where your child can go get help. But if your student is resistant and they don't want to do this, you've got to talk to them about being specific. So sometimes when you go to a teacher and you say, the child says, I don't know how to do this math, it's not as helpful. They're going to have a better outcome if they go to the teacher and they say, I'm really struggling with dividing fractions, or I don't understand number 4. First of all, kids are more willing to go to get help if they have something specific. And number 2, it saves time because the teacher is able to help them on that specific thing. It saves time with lots of back and forth. There could also be the college student down the street that could help your child. Or you could hire a professional, which is what we do. We work with kids as tutors, but more specifically as executive function coaches. Because many of the students we work with need help with subjects, but they also need help with things like organization, managing their time, planning ahead, executing on their work, and reducing procrastination. So your first step when you see your child struggling is to reach out to the teacher. And I personally like starting with the words, I've noticed. I think they're magic. I've noticed with my kids, with students that I've tutored, in my classroom, with my spouse, in all kinds of ways. And I like the words I've noticed because you're saying, it feels like a gentler approach. You could go to the teacher and you could say, I've had it with all this homework. Jimmy doesn't know how to do any of this math. It's ridiculous. It's just too much. It's too much. You need to stop giving so much homework and make it easier for them in class. That might not feel so great to the teacher. Or you could say, I've noticed that Jimmy is really struggling with math equations. Have you noticed that in class too? Do you have any suggestions to help? Because now you're just telling the teacher what you've noticed. You're not passing any judgment. And ideally, if you can go to the teacher sooner rather than later, that's better. If you wait too late, it's often hard for kids to dig themselves out of a hole. But if you do it when you see struggle early on, especially in the fall, that's the ideal time. But all of these resources, talking to the teacher, going after school, getting help outside from a professional or a college student, these work better often than a parent trying to intervene and help, because these outside people do not have an emotional history with your child. They haven't had these arguments and fights over homework like you have with your child. So if you feel like you're at your wit's end and you feel like your child will not listen to you, that's when you want to find a support that doesn't have the emotional attachment like you, or maybe your spouse does. We hear this all the time. Parents will say, I can't believe she did that. I told her the exact same thing. I tried to get her to do that too, but she wouldn't do it for me. And that's pretty normal. We see that a lot. When we work with kids, one of the first things we do is that we want our students we want to know what is happening in their school. So, if you're in Fairfax County, you log into the homework portal. If you happen to have a child in another school district, it's the same thing. You're going to log into the portal. And what we do is we have the child click on all their classes so that we can understand what they have coming up. This helps from things falling through the cracks. So we want to know, what do you have coming up and when is it due? And then we take that information and we help the child to put it. Ideally, they're using an electronic calendar. If they're younger, like this student in the picture, they might use a whiteboard, they might have a paper and pencil assignment notebook. But most kids are using the calendar they have within their platform. And they're going to the calendar and they're seeing, okay, is it in there? So it should populate. If you have a test on Friday, it should populate into the calendar that says test on Friday. But what it doesn't do, what the software doesn't do, is to say, okay, you have a test on Friday. What am I going to do to prepare for that test? Well, on Wednesday, this is a discussion we have with the student. Could you review your Quizlet cards for a half hour? Great. And then on Thursday, what could you do to get ready? And then that also goes into the calendar. We help kids look for something called weird windows. And weird windows are these little pockets of time that they wouldn't have thought of otherwise. Many of the kids these days are incredibly busy. They're playing sports. They have extracurricular activities. And when they don't have a lot of time on their hands, they have to leverage all the time that they do have. So weird windows would be a strange period of time, like the half hour you're waiting for your allergy shot, or maybe there's an hour before you go to your lacrosse practice, or maybe you get home and there's an hour before you eat dinner or right after dinner that you're typically just scrolling through Instagram. These would be weird windows. And so we help kids find these weird windows and then pop in their assignments, these little short intervals that they're going to be doing work. And then the next step when we work with kids is to help them actually complete the assignment. We'll ask them, out of all this stuff you have to do, what's the heaviest on you? Like, what is going to be the hardest assignment for you? Which is the one you're most likely to procrastinate over? And we help them do that one, because they can do the easy ones on their own, but they often need help and need figuring out for how to tackle these hard things. And then the last part of the session, and this is probably my favorite, is to anticipate obstacles. And this is what I will say, kids with ADHD and learning disabilities are not very good at. They are incredibly optimistic, like, oh yeah, I can totally get that 5-paragraph essay done in an hour. I can do the research and bump this out, no problem. Chances are they've overestimated the time that they have and they've underestimated how much time it's really going to take them to do it. So that's part of the work we do with students, is anticipating the obstacles. All right, what could get in your way of getting this done? Oh, well, I'm binge watching a show on Netflix, or I don't know, I just can't get off Instagram, or I love the videos on TikTok, or, oh, my friends and I were down the rabbit hole with these text messages. Whatever it is, kids are often honest, and then we'll help them troubleshoot that. So if it's that they're distracted by Netflix or something else, we'll say, okay, and this is one strategy you can use as a parent or guardian too. What if we tricked your brain? And tricking your brain is something that we often have to do, because our brains are creatures of habit. They like the easy way out. So if our brain has a choice between Instagram and doing math homework, what is our brain going to pick? It's not math, it's Instagram. That feels easy, passive, really good, soothing, whereas math feels hard. So we've got to tell our brain, hey, actually, brain, it's not that hard. I'm going to do something easy for you, brain, to think that it's not so bad after all. So I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. And this is a strategy we teach our kids. And it's an oldie but goodie. I love it. I'm going to set the timer for something super short, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes. If it's 10 minutes, we call it the tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for just 10 minutes. And you say this mantra to yourself: I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best I can, focus as much as I can, just for 10 minutes, and then I can take a quick break. That gets kids over the hump of getting started. They're tricking their brain. For older kids that need to work in broader swaths of time, there's research and how much time they can ideally sustain focus. And this was a study done by an Italian researcher in the 80s, and it's called the Pomodoro technique. And he wanted to see, when you're working alone, how much time can your brain really focus to its optimal ability? Is it 10 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it 90 minutes? And he found that it's actually 25 minutes. So we'll teach kids to use this Pomodoro technique, where they set a timer for 25 minutes and they say the same mantra: I'm going to work as hard as I can, best as I can, focus as much as I can, just for 25 minutes. And then I can take a 5-minute break. And if they're able, they can then start it again for 25 minutes and take a 5-minute break. But what this researcher found is, even for adults, the brain cannot tolerate more than 4 Pomodoros in a row. So this is how it looks: Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. But for kids, it's usually 1 Pomodoro, a break, and maybe 2. All right, so we talked a lot about strategies. Let's get on to communication. At the beginning of the year, one thing we want to do is make sure that our kids do not get into the dreaded doom loop, which, if you have a child with ADHD or a learning disability, this is often par for the course. Here's what happens: they get a bad grade, they get criticism from others, like their parents, maybe their coach, their teacher. And when they hear that, it results in lower confidence. And lower confidence results in reduced effort. And when you don't have a lot of effort, often it starts all over again: a bad grade, criticism from others. This is called the doom loop. So we want to help our kids break free of the doom loop. We definitely do not want this to happen, especially at the beginning of the year. So often when we see kids in a doom loop, we say things like, why didn't you turn that in? Did you see your teacher after school like I told you to? These questions aren't usually successful. Instead, we want to use communication, and we want to set up a time to talk with our child. So if you see your child struggling in school, one option you have is go to the teacher, but you also need to talk to your child and set aside time. Like, let's discuss this after dinner tonight. How is 7:30 for you? And you can use those words: I've noticed again. So let's say your child has some overdue math assignments and it's only the beginning of the year and you've already seen this happening. You could say, how could you possibly have 3 overdue math assignments already? It's only September. That's crazy. Or you could say, hey, I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of your math work. What feels better? It's the I've noticed, because you're not criticizing your child. You're just saying what you've seen. It could be more specific. I've noticed equations are really hard. Tell me about it. And this is what you want to say next. Tell me about it. And you want to have a dialogue with your child, right? You want them to share with you what's happening and how they're feeling. And we don't want to pass judgment. We want to listen. I get it. You're right. Math can be really hard. Nod and empathize. We can also ask open-ended questions like, I totally get it. Tell me more about that. Or, that's interesting. What makes you say that? If maybe your child is willing to try a new strategy, you might say, what do you think of this strategy? So all of this communication I also have on that back to school page. It's ectutoring.com/BTS-2023. We really want to strengthen our connections with our kids. This is really ideal. So we don't want to start with those questions like, did you? But we want to normalize situations. And we do this with the students we work with all the time. We'll say, you know what, you're right. This math is hard. And I have another 7th grade student I work with, and he's struggling with it too. So when kids feel like they're not alone, that this happens to other people too, it helps them to feel better. Again, we always want to empathize, because when we do these things, we're allowing kids to be part of the discussion, and then they co-own it. They take responsibility, and they're more likely to be independent. And I tell you also, all these things are easier said than done, because it's hard when you see your child struggling. You want to jump in and tell them what to do. And it's easy to be negative. But I've found that kids with ADHD and with learning disabilities tend to internalize things we say more than typical students. And they feel very sensitive to criticism. So if we are going to deliver a criticism, be sure to buffer that with 3 positives, like could be a pat on the back. I love the way you started on that, or you're such an amazing human being, or what a great idea to put the phone on the other side of the room, or I'm so happy to see you right now. All of these things are positive comments. And we can also keep it positive by having nag-free times through our day. And this could be dinner time. We can make this nothing about academics when we're eating our meal together. It's just about discussion. How are you doing? It might be in the car ride. We have kids as a captive audience, and instead of them having our earbuds in, if they know that the conversation isn't going to be accusatory, but it's really checking in, that's a great way to go. At the end of the day, we want to maintain relationships. That is really core. Honestly, our kids aren't really going to remember the grade they got in 7th grade history, but they will remember our relationship with them. And so for all of you out there, if you feel like you want to work on your relationship with your child, that's when you want to reach out to help, where your school can be your ally, the parent resource center, or a professional on the outside. And we're here to help you. I have 3 program managers I work with, Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart, and you can scan this QR code and they're happy to talk with you about your child on a phone call. And then lastly, Mary Beth, before we end, I want to mention that we're having a summit next week for parents of kids with ADHD. It's virtual. It's from Monday through Friday from 12 to 1. I've got Michelle Mullally talking about parenting. A student with ADHD, Robert Brooks, he's phenomenal. He's on the staff at Harvard Medical School. He's talking about motivation and resiliency. Cliff Sussman is talking about digital addiction in kids. Kristen Landis is talking about getting into college for kids with ADHD. And then Kathy is discussing organization and time management for students with ADHD. And even if you just want to go to one of these days, just register and we'll send you the invite, or you can use that same invite for every day. And again, scan that QR code and we'll get that to you right away. Or you can go to our website, which is ectutoring.com/ADHD-summit. So Parent Resource Center, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And Mary Beth, I would love to turn it over to you.
All right. And thank you so much. Wow. Such amazing strategies and resources for our families. And I know that these resources really work with all kids. And so thank you for sharing that. So we would love to hear your questions or see your questions. If you don't mind if you have questions for Ann, putting those in the chat. Do highly recommend if you want some more information, as Ann talked about her summit next week. There's some really, really great presenters and certainly and previous webinars are also on our YouTube channel, and I certainly invite you all to take a look at that. All right, any questions for Ann? We'll give people a minute here to type some things in.
And Mary Beth, do you have one
Yeah.
that you often hear from parents at the Parent Resource Center?
Oh, gosh. Certainly families are always very concerned about missing assignments and kind of getting into that negative pattern of, checking and talking and feeling like they're in a little bit of a power struggle. And I know you've addressed some of that already, but what's a really quick tip when maybe as a parent, you're feeling like you're starting to get kind of emotional about all of that? How might a parent maybe temper their emotions a bit and have that calm conversation?
Sure. Well, first of all, I can say what I've seen happen is that parents will go onto the homework portal. They'll go to Blackboard or whatever their portal is, and they'll they'll check the child's grades without them. And it often doesn't go well because sometimes they'll see a bad grade or a missing assignment and they jump to conclusions. Sometimes there's a reason behind that. There's often a delay between what the student does and what the teacher posts. So I would recommend maybe setting aside 10 minutes every week to go, if you're anxious about it, to go through it with your child and to ask the questions. And not make it accusatory, but just say, oh, can you show me how you're doing in English? Do you need help with any of this? And if it's a predictable routine, like we do this every Friday, and as best you can, you don't pass judgment. You're just asking them to show you. That's more accountability for the student. And I also like that approach rather than going behind the student's back and getting this information and then hard charging and asking them about it, because that really results in a lot of fractured relationships.
No, thank you for that. I probably needed that advice when mine was in high school. But anyway, all right. So a parent is asking about, do you have a bit of a script to help stop the nagging?
Yes. In fact, we have, I wrote this out. We have, it's like literally word for word. And that is in, I believe that's in the back to school packet that's on our website. And I gave that link. It's ectutoring.com/BTS-2023. But Melissa, if you're here and you know where that blog is, you can also post that into the chat. But yeah, I wrote that out, like, instead of this, say this. And that's really helpful because it's something we all, I mean, I know I've experienced that as a parent myself. I think it's especially hard because I have ADHD and both my kids have ADHD. And so sometimes you just feel like you're a hamster on a wheel. You're trying to keep up with your own life. And then you have these kids that have these same issues that you're also trying to keep up with. And it just can, it's easy to go negative, and we always have to recheck and think, okay, how can I say this differently? And that script can help with that.
Great, thank you. So another parent is asking, they have a fifth grader and an eighth grader, and apparently both of their schools are kind of no homework schools. So teachers mention tests, but sometimes they may not be in Schoology or maybe conveyed to parents. How does this parent assist her children to learn time management and study strategies kind of under those conditions?
We, depending on the school, some schools have very limited homework, and
Right.
It is harder to teach these skills. So the one thing that you can do is you'll have to teach them through extracurriculars if they do not have them. So that's why that Sunday session of like, okay, let's plan ahead. That's a time management skill of looking ahead. Kids with ADHD are now or not now kids. And so if they're now kids, it's just like, just see things in the moment. So by us helping them to look ahead, that you're really teaching them a good skill in elementary school about time management. You can also teach them skills about, maybe you have time where you read together. You can say, okay, let's have this routine of reading together after dinner or right before bed. And you can ask, how long should we read together? You can set a timer if you want. You could talk about time in terms of that context. So it's a little bit harder to do when students don't have any homework. So you'll have to do it through the things that you do. Also, I'll mention, you can do it with, like, if your child's going to soccer practice, for example, you can say, we're leaving for soccer practice in 20 minutes. And I would recommend, if your child has a hard time with what is 20 minutes, getting a timer like the time timer, because it has this red floating disc. And that really helps kids understand time, because it's not just like you're setting a microwave timer and they see now 4 minutes, 14 minutes and 11 seconds are left. They don't understand that. But when they see the red floating disc, that helps them a lot. And so I'd recommend getting one of those.
No, that's great. And kind of on the timer, when you talked about the Pomodoro timer, for children that are very young, so this mom is talking about her child in first grade. And while they do tend to have a routine of doing things at home together with regard to academics, but that usually doesn't last more than around 5 minutes. The question is, that 25 minutes that you talked about with Pomodoro, is that applicable to younger children? Should it be less time? How might a parent manage that?
That would not be applicable to younger kids. And I'm so sorry if I didn't mention that, because you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And it is for a first grader. I would, the 25-minute, I would recommend that for, eighth grade and up, maybe a seventh.
Mm,
Seventh graders should be able to sustain that much attention. But for really young kids, like my general rule of thumb is take their age and add a minute, and that's about what they can
mm,
sustain for like a
mhm,
first grader. So we wouldn't want to set a timer for like a half hour, because that would be too long for them. And certainly every student is different. Sometimes parents say timers freak out my kid and it makes them really anxious. And if that's the case with your student, do not use a timer at all. You can help kids manage time by time or task. So time would be the timer, and task would be, hey, you have this whole worksheet to do. Oh, do this, fold it in half. So take the worksheet, fold it in half as an example, and just do the top section instead of the whole thing. Or just do every odd one, or just get started and do the first three. That's also another way of breaking something down.
no, thank you. Um, this mom is talking about her child who happens to have ADHD and is in third grade. And her wondering is, are there any particular suggestions on creating routines for elementary school students? And what might the rest of an afternoon routine look like for a child? Like that's around 8 or 9.
Sure. So you can also have a routine around access to digital devices.
Mm,
Parents do all kinds of things. Like you can say, our routine is nothing digital until after 6:30, or nothing digital between, 4 and 6, whatever you want to set the parameter. But for young kids, like a third grader, I would have a routine around their access to digital devices. You can have routines also around getting ready to go somewhere. That's a really great place to have a routine. Maybe you have the routine of, okay, these are the 3 things you have to bring to hockey practice. And maybe you put those 3 things on the door from which your child exits. You can have a routine of, in the morning, these are the 3 things you do. You brush your teeth, you get dressed, and you put your dirty clothes in a hamper, as an example. And maybe those 3 things are on the mirror in the bathroom. And so those little checklists like that, no more than 3 things, can also help kids. I found over time, they tend not to work so well. So you have to like make the checklist fancy. You kind of have to sparkleize it. So you might put it on a different color piece of paper. You might move it to a different place. Might put stickers on it to make it look attractive again.
right. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Some of our son's homework is on his take-home school computer. If we leave him alone to do it, he strays onto games or YouTube videos. Any suggestions to help keep him on task for the time allotted? Maybe allow games as a reward at breaks or the end of homework. What might you suggest?
I love that idea, games as a reward. If you take away everything outside of that, you can see why the child might go to playing
Mhm.
games on their computer. But if you can maybe shorten the homework time, and I call this designated homework time, and you say, okay, homework, I'm just making this up, it might be different in your family, is from 5 to 6, if that's enough time. And then that way it's not like it can drag on too long and they're doing other things. I call the kids that like drag it on for a long time, I call them Super Bowl kids. And when we watch the Super Bowl in January, it's on for 4 hours, but they only really play the game for an hour. And sometimes kids are like that. They'll be up in their room doing homework and they'll be up there forever. And you're either thinking, okay, what are they really doing? Or boy, they have a lot of homework, but it's usually the former. What are they doing with all this time? So if we can kind of condense it into part of that time, it will help them to be a little bit more efficient.
That's great. Thank you. So we have a high schooler here. And unfortunately, this apparently when parents want to talk with their high schooler, they want to shut down. They don't necessarily want to go talk to the teacher about things. How might a parent maybe help navigate that with their child? And maybe then how might they help them navigate talking with their teacher?
I shared some strategies using a positive language, like I've noticed,
Hmm.
and you'll absolutely want to try those with your child. But also, it doesn't work overnight.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, if kids see like, wow, my mom is treating me differently now, they're not going to say, oh, mom, blah, blah, and just open up to you. It takes time. It takes patience before they come around. And we deal with this all the time with students that we work with. Sometimes the parent will call our office and the kid isn't really on board. And so we have to figure out, what is the child willing to do with us? A common one is that parents want their kids to be like really organized, and the kid doesn't really care about that, but they might care about getting a good grade in their science class, for example, and they're willing to learn study techniques and study habits. And so sometimes it might be that we focus on the wrong thing. You could figure out, if you're always trying to get your child to do this one thing and it's not working, I would forget about that. It might not actually be that important. Maybe it could be something else, and develop that positive relationship around the something else. And so I might just approach it differently. And I'd also let the teacher know what's happening, and so that they're aware. And you can say, I'm really trying to get, Mary to go in to see you, but she's dragging her feet. I've noticed it's hard for her for ask for help. I just wanted to let you know what's happening on my end, because that way the teacher can say, oh, Mary, I'm happy to help you with this after school. Does today work for you? And then your child's hearing it from somebody else as well.
Great, thank you. Um, so we have a first grader who often struggles, and probably even older children, maybe even some of our high schoolers, struggle with conveying kind of what's happened during the school day. Um, would there be questions or prompts that maybe would be helpful for families, so the child doesn't feel like it's, you're questioning, kind of, and producing some level of anxiety for this child?
Sure. So here's what I would do. I would only start with things the child's good at already. Like, do they like recess? So the question is, oh, who did you play with at recess? Did you guys play dodgeball, or did you play tag, or what did you do at recess? Oh, what was for lunch today? What was on the menu? Was that good? Oh, pizza? Was it different than last week? So asking them about only things they like, only things that they feel positive about, really helps the conversation to get going.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's see. Um, I'm looking. How do you handle a routine when something has changed, like your child is really, really irritable or impatient or unfocused? Um, they're maybe not dealing with their consequences. How does the parent maybe navigate those kind of maybe even emotional regulation concerns with their
Mhm.
children?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing, and it's something that I don't think we talk about enough. We often think about kids with, that have an IEP or a 504, or we think about it in an academic setting, but so
Hmm.
much of it is really all about emotional regulation. Um, Everybody has bad days. If you see your child um, really disengaging, and um, or you're in major power struggles, I would really back off of the power struggle. And somebody told me this once, and I believe it to be true. If you think you're in a power struggle, you already are. So even if you think it's going in that direction and there's about to be tension and a fight around it, like, that's the time to disengage. But here's what happens. Sometimes our kids, they will disengage around everything, not just, that one thing, and they'll go to their room and shut the door. They push us out of their lives. And sometimes, we take the approach of, okay, I'm just going to leave him alone because clearly he doesn't want me in his life right now. But I might take the other approach, and I might try to lean in a little bit and say, hey, I'm just thinking about you. You okay? How are you doing? And just that, how are you doing? I'm thinking of you. I love you so much. I've thought about you today a lot. Leaning in like that is a good way to get started, rather than leaning in about anything academic.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Even when I'm talking to my, 24-year-old daughter now, sometimes we have to lean into the emotional pieces first before we talk about the other stuff. So thank you. That's wonderful, wonderful advice. Are there any other questions? I think we have kind of come down to the end. One more. Here we go. So a ninth grader. So how do you figure out, and this is a tough one. So how do you figure out how to monitor your child's use of time when both parents are kind of away from the home a lot? They're working outside the home and how do you maybe set up that kind of system so expectations are understood and perhaps then followed through on?
It is really hard when nobody's there to oversee. So I'm not sure the age of the child, but what I might think about doing is having them check in with you right when they get home. Maybe
Mm,
they call you at work or text you and say, "Hey, I'm here."
yeah.
And then you might say, "Okay, great. I'm so relieved. I'm glad you're okay. Hey, what is your priority for today? What is the one thing you want to get done?" It's
Mhm.
hard when you're not there to make sure they get everything done. It's just not going
Yeah.
to happen. But I like asking, what's your priority? In other
Mhm.
words, if you got this one thing done, you would feel really good. And as a parent, the
Yeah.
kid would feel good
Yep.
and you would kind of feel good. Um, and so it also just gets kids focused on that. Like, what is that one thing? Because
Hmm.
if you don't ask the question, they're going to likely to procrastinate, not get
Hmm.
started, have a
Yeah.
whole laundry list of things to do, get overwhelmed and not do anything. So
No,
that's a good way to start.
absolutely. So, and to kind of segue, so how another question really off of what you just said, Anne, um, how do you balance between making sure that you're monitoring all those things and making sure though that at some point you're building that independence?
Mhm. Well, it will fluctuate with age.
Hmm.
And also consider, if you have a 12-year-old with ADHD, they might have the maturity of more like a 9-year-old. So you're just going to have to be a little bit more involved. And, I've had parents say to me, like, "Oh, my child's 12. He should be able to do this by now, like everybody else is." But it's a little bit different when your child has learning difficulties or ADHD.
Hmm.
Um, so we tend as parents to have to be a little bit more involved with our kids. But ultimately, we want to follow the adage of getting them started and then departing. Like getting them
Right.
started. Do you know what to do? Okay, awesome. I'm going to be over here. Come get me. I'm going to be doing my email. Come over and get me if you need me. And that's kind of a way it's like a happy medium. You could
Yeah.
even ask them when they get started, what's the one thing you want to get accomplished, or what are your top three
Hmm.
priorities? Those are good questions too.
Okay. Great. And there was a question about the conference next week.
Mhm.
Um, would that be useful for parents of students with learning disabilities? Is
Oh,
a question.
absolutely. Yes, for
Okay.
sure.
Okay. And they said they're just looking to better understand connections between disability and social emotional skills and how to advocate um,
Mhm.
for their child.
Mhm.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Anne, thank you so much. This has been terrific, and thank you for your time answering our questions today. And we really appreciate everyone joining us. Please, if you have further questions for Anne and her team, please do reach out to them. We've put their information in the chat as well. And then certainly if you all want to reach out to the Family Resource Center, we have resources and consultations available for families as well. So thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day and weekend and everyone take care. Thanks again, Anne.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye bye.